So here we are. What is today's date, Norma? It is March the 5th of 2014, and I'm Malcolm High, class of 67 from Sunnyvale High School. And this is Norma Buchan, who was married for how many wonderful years to George Buchan?
66 years.
66 years, that's fantastic. So every few months I stop by and see Norma at Villa Serena over here in Santa Clara, and we're just going to talk. So tell me about how you and George met.
George met me on a bet.
On a bet? B-E-T?
B-E-T.
Not a bed.
No. We were at Shenandoah College.
Which is
The
that
fellows-
Pennsylvania?
In Virginia.
In Shenandoah College in Virginia.
And the athletes were living in this little house called the Hornet's Nest. And the other fellows most of them were dating one of other girls on the campus. And they asked George why he wasn't dating anyone, and he said, "I'm too busy.
Got other things to do."
Interested." And they said, "Oh, it's just because you can't get a date." He said, "I can get a date if I want one." And they said, "Okay, it's a bet." What the bet was, I don't know. He said, "Okay, what do you want me to do?" And they said, he said, "Just name a girl that's not going with anybody." And I said, "Well, how about Norma Trowbridge?" He said, "Who's Norma Trowbridge?" And I said, "She's the president of YWCA."
For crying out loud.
He was the agnostic.
By the way, that is this lovely lady here.
He was the agnostic one on the campus, the church college. And so a few days later, a date in Shenandoah was to take a walk around the lake. It was the because the girls.
So what year are we talking?
37.
1937, people.
And let's see, 1937. The girls had to be in at 7 o'clock, so
Curfew.
There were limits to what we could do. So one evening after dinner, he approached me and he says, "Would you like to take a walk?" And I said, "Okay." And the walk was so interesting. We discussed metaphors, similes, hyperboles, and all those very interesting things. But the bet was for one date. But after we saw each other every day after that.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And
So when he asked you for the date, you knew who he was?
oh, I knew who he was because I knew he was from Pittsburgh. We were both from Pittsburgh.
Both, okay, Pennsylvania.
Yes. And because the coach was from Pittsburgh, and he's the one that got George to Shenandoah.
So George was an athlete.
Oh yes, he played football.
Yeah.
And I guess if we both didn't live in Pittsburgh, I would have never seen him after we left Shenandoah. But because we did, from then on, we saw each other off and on for 4 years.
Nice.
And he went on to Leeds McRae College in Appalachian State and graduated from Appalachian State.
And I think he played football at Appalachian too.
Yeah, at both Leeds McRae and Appalachian. Actually, he made Little All-American on somebody's team. I don't know whose.
The guy had abilities.
Yeah. And he was in dramatics, and wrote a column for the paper, and he was
in a
getting
lot of the
honors in teaching. And
Norma's actually showed me pictures of George, and he was in quite a few of the school plays.
yes,
And lead roles.
and he wrote a great deal. So he was home for Christmas in 1945, and the war had just broken. 1941. The war had just broken out, and he said, "I think we ought to get married."
What a romantic.
That was it. So we did what we had to do to get the license. So I didn't tell anyone. I figured, well,
It was around December.
this was Christmas.
Yeah, because I know your anniversary.
Yeah. And so the day after Christmas, I came downstairs to my mother, and I said, "Mother, by the way, George and I are getting married today."
By the way. And her reaction was,
Oh.
who's George?
No, they knew who George was. She said, "Oh, I wondered why you didn't go to work." That was it. So anyway, he returned to college. That was on a Friday, and he returned to college. Back to school on Monday.
So, was George involved with the war at all, or was he?
Oh yes, yes. That summer, he was a lifeguard. He graduated that summer from Appalachian, and then he enlisted rather than wait to be.
Because Pearl Harbor had happened in December the 7th of that same,
Yeah,
41.
Yeah. So this was 42 now, and so he enlisted and went into the Air Force, and he applied for cadets, navigation, of course, because of his love of geography, and he graduated from cadet school.
If I may interject, a man who up until that time had traveled within how many of the states? Every state.
Every state. By the time he was 16, he had been in every state
In the United States. Think about that.
And in fact, his springtime just brought it out. He would sometimes just get up and walk out of class and be gone. So
Can you imagine doing that in Mr. Viewcamp's class, senior year, Sunnyvale High? I think that cane would come down real hard.
the vice principal called him in one time and he says, "George, I know what you want to do and I approve of it." He said, "But the next time, just tell me that when you're
let
going
me
to go."
know. No. Oh my goodness.
So during the war, he was a navigator in the B-17s. He met his crew in Dalhart, Texas, and I quit my job I was working for the government at the time, civil service, and I'm going to spend the last 6 weeks with him before he went overseas. And he flown to England. This was before D-Day. All this was before D-Day.
Got it.
And so he finished his missions before D-Day, and he wrote to me that he was staying on to help train new crews. Well, I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and here he is standing by the bed, and I nearly had kerflops.
I like that. Kerflops.
So
You so kerflopped. So that would have been what year? 19?
That would have been, let's see, it was 44. 44.
Yeah.
Yeah, early 44.
So how did you guys eventually get out to Sunnyvale?
Oh, dear God. Well, first he was still in the service when he came back. He was in the service for over a year until after 45 when the war was over. And so we came back to Pittsburgh, and he wanted to go back to graduate school. We went back to North Carolina and went into sociology. It was too much, too soon. We were there 8 months. He decided he didn't want it. He wasn't ready yet. So we went back to Pittsburgh. Then we went to Washington, D.C. To work for a few months. He worked for the Veterans Administration, and I worked for Interior.
IRS?
And then...
Oh no, Interior, yeah.
Hmm?
You worked for the Interior?
Interior, yeah. And went back to Pittsburgh, but he went to Washington to the Pentagon, and they said, to find out what his status was, and they said they couldn't say he would not be called, but the chances were he could go ahead and make whatever plans he wanted to do. So George said, well, let's go to California.
Yes, for us. Good for Sunnyvale High and Benner. So you guys came out in 19...
That was 1950.
Got it.
And that was our first time we came to Sunnyvale.
What was your impressions of coming out to California?
Oh, it was wonderful, because this was my first time across the country, and it was just wonderful. And we stopped in Sacramento to meet an old Air Force buddy, but anyway, but George said we had to settle someplace between Carmel and San Francisco. He said that's the best part of California.
Smart man.
So we got here. Sunnyvale had 10,000 people, and there were no schools. I mean,
Fremont
High School was the only school. There was no jobs were available at that time. So we both got a job at fiberglass. I was working for the vice president. He was working in the plant, but that's.
You were bringing home more than he was, weren't you?
And so anyway, that only lasted 6 months. We went back. He decided he wanted to he wanted to write. So we drove. We went to New Jersey, to Maryland. We had our old coach friend from Pittsburgh was teaching now at the Naval Academy, and so with their help we found a little place in nearby Maryland, and George did some writing there. Wasn't successful, and back to Pittsburgh. Then we went back.
I'll get you some water.
Over there. Yeah.
You can keep talking.
Thank you.
I know you're going to get back to Sunnyvale at least 2 times.
Oh yes, we came back. Then we came back the next year, and that time we both worked at Shuckle's Cannery. I worked in the office for the vice president. He worked in the plant. But anyway, that was for 6 months. Then he got a letter from a friend in North Carolina saying there were some jobs teaching in Raleigh. Would he be interested? And George said, of course he was. And so we left Sunnyvale again and went to Raleigh themselves. That they were going to get rid of the football coach and make George football coach. That for that next year, George came home and he says, I can't do that. He says, the coach is a decent guy and he's nice, great, really a nice man. So we left.
Yeah.
We left at the end of the semester.
Principled man.
And that's when we came back to
Sunnyvale,
California again.
I can speak for probably many of the students that George taught. We had no idea. I had no idea that he was so into football, which Norma and I have talked about this in the past. He was quite the athlete.
Oh
yeah.
He was involved in athletics all his life. I mean, that's what put him through college.
So when you returned, Sunnyvale High hadn't opened yet, so he started teaching.
No, he taught at Benner for 2 years.
Taught at Benner Middle, well, we call it junior high.
For 2 years.